This morning we continue our study dealing with spiritual success or distress. We are in lesson number 5, talking about Jesus being the humble servant. And I'd like to encourage you to be turning to the Gospel of John, the 13th chapter. The Gospel of John, the 13th chapter, and we'll be beginning there in verse 1. Talking about Jesus being the example of ultimate humility. And we would put this in the context of deity being humble, but also in his humanity. Many people struggle, I guess we could use that word, with doing some things for others. And we live in a world today that kind of has this attitude that, doing such and such is beneath me. I mean, I'm better than that. And I hear people make statements like, I can't go out and do that job. And I think to myself, I said, well, that job's not too bad. I've done it before. And you can add in whatever it is. I'm sure that many of us have had jobs that we didn't like too well. I'm not much of a plumber because I don't want to be. But the worst part of being a plumber is the sewage problem. And I've seen some pretty harsh situations where you had to get down into the nitty gritty, if I might utilize that term, to fix the problem. Well, there are people that that's beneath them. They wouldn't do anything like that. Whenever you work with first responders and those kinds of things, you get into situations that are sometimes unpleasant. And some people say, oh, I can't deal with that. I can't do that. And if you're going to help somebody, sometimes you just got to get in there and do it. But we live in a society that believes that, well, I'm entitled and I don't have to do any of these kind of things. And again, you can fill in whatever you can think of along that line that somebody might not want to do. There you go. I was always brought up the idea that if it needed to be done, you better get in there and get it done. Just roll up your sleeves and go for it. But that's not always been the case with everybody. In your outline here, this is lesson 5, the humble servant. It says, Jesus the servant did not view any person as meaningless or worthless, not a leper, not a tax collector, not a prostitute, not a Samaritan, not the blind or lame, not the diseased, nor even the demon-possessed. Jesus did not regard any act of service as being beneath him. And, sometimes we run across individuals that we think, well, I don't know about that person because of their situation, whatever it might be. But every person out there, you know what they've got that's important? They got a soul. That's important. And sometimes we scratch our heads and wonder why people do things to themselves physically that maybe they don't understand what they've done to themselves or whatever the situation may be. But they're not worthless. They're not meaningless. And that precious soul, you know how much that precious soul is worth? Jesus dying on the cross. The Son of God dying on the cross. So Jesus was not just a servant, and we see within him coming to this world his servanthood, But also we find here within this context his humility. As we look at John chapter 13, starting there in verse 1, this focuses on Jesus being the humble servant. And it notes here in the first 6 verses, it asks the question, lists the specific things that Jesus did when he arose from completing the meal. So let's start at verse 1 of John chapter 13. It says, now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come, that he would depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Jesus knew that the end was coming. He knew what he was about to deal with, all the things that he suffered on the way to the cross and the cross. And it says, during supper, the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him. And I'll tell you what, betrayal is a horrid thing. And Jesus knew that he was going to be betrayed because that was in the plan. He had to be betrayed so that humanity could be blessed by him giving his life as that ultimate sacrifice. Now I want you to look at verse 3. It says, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and that he had come forth from God and was going back to God. The Father had sent Jesus to fulfill this need. He understood that. He knew that he had come from God. He knew that he was going back to God. In verse 4, it says, he got up from supper, lay aside his garments, taking a towel, he girded himself. This is the Son of God. After this supper, he gets up and he lays aside his garments. The garment is that which was precious to the individual in this time period. We've read so many times in Scripture where someone would give their garment, but it had to be given back to them at night, because that was the key factor in not only keeping them warm or cool, or it was a mainstay in this. But he laid bare himself. He took his garment away, and he took a towel and tied it. In essence, I think some of our versions note that it was tied around his waist, but he girded himself. And you can go back and do a study on girding. In essence, he tied it around his waist, and he was in that place of servitude. In verse 5, it said, then he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. Now, folks of that day either wore sandals or they went barefoot. Now, the thing was that your feet got very dirty because of that. And a lot of times whenever someone would come into one's house, they would wash their feet because they were dirty. And it was a sign of respect. Well, here Jesus lays aside his garments, takes the towel, girds it around himself, and he pours water into the basin. Now, when we think about this, this was usually left to the lowliest slave of the home, or the lowliest person in the home. So he gets up and he's doing this function, and he washes the disciples' feet and wipes them with the towel that he had girded around himself. This was ultimate servitude, humble servitude that Jesus did. And if we look at this, we see several things. Jesus is showing them by illustration that he's going to be the ultimate service to humanity through his death, burial, and resurrection, and all that he's going to go through. The disciples, of course, as we know, was struggling with the idea still that Jesus was going to rise up, be a king, and they would be part of his cabinet, if you will, or entourage, whatever word that you would like to use there. But he didn't do that. He washed their feet, the lowly thing of the lowlies. In number 2 on our worksheet, it says, please take note of the fact that this was an intentional act. Jesus didn't have to do this. This was something to teach his humility and the service that he was doing for them. And again, I think about this in comparison with his sacrifice on the cross. He lowered himself to be crucified between two robbers. What is it? Robbers, people that was stealing, those kinds of things. The lowest of the low. So he also notes to discuss the emotion and feeling that may have stirred in the disciples' minds and hearts as they watched Jesus prepare for and perform the act of washing their feet. Well, here was the Lord, and he's going to do this for me. And we'll see this as we get on down here, where Peter kind of has a misunderstanding of what's going on. But in verse 7, or let's go back up to verse 7. Let's go to verse 6. So he came to Simon Peter. He said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Lord, you shouldn't be humble down there. You're the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. You're the teacher. You're the one that's important here. And here you're washing my feet? Verse 7. Jesus answered and said to him, what I do, you do not realize now, but you will understand hereafter. So that's why I think so many times we look at this, and this is kind of a precursor to his sacrifice on the cross. In verse 8, it says, Peter said to him, never shall you wash my feet. And Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. And I think it interesting in my mind is Peter saying, no, why are you washing my feet? You shouldn't be doing this. This is not your place. Don't wash my feet. And Jesus says, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. If we're not washed in the blood of Jesus, do we have a part in him? No. You see the comparison that he's teaching here? So many people come to the point, Jesus, I don't need Jesus to wash me with his blood and baptism, and all of these things. But if we don't have a part with him. We have to accept the sacrifice and the humility. And, Jesus's humility on the cross kind of comes to mind in this same thing. In verse 9, it says, Simon Peter said to him, Lord, then wash not only my feet, but also wash my hands and my head. He wanted a bath. Well, that wasn't what was being taught here. He kind of went overboard, for a better word. In verse 10, it says, Jesus said to him, he who has bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. The thing about it is that as we look here at verse 10, they need to realize how important what's going on is as they look forward to. Again, he notes here, he says in verse 7, what you do not realize now, you will understand hereafter in the future. In verse 11, it says, for he knew the one who was betraying him, and for this reason he said, not all of you are clean. And he knew what Judas was going to do. And he was going to betray the Christ. And you can go back and read everything that happened to Judas Iscariot. In number 4, it says, what is the first thing Jesus did when he completed the task of washing their feet? And in verse 12, it says, so then he had washed their feet and taken his garment and reclined at the table again and said to them, do you know what I have done for you? Well, as he noted up in verse 7, they kind of were struggling, trying to get it all in their minds. They were thinking other things, but this was a great example of humility that Jesus did for all of us, even today, when we think about his sacrifice. In number 5, it says, what did they call Jesus? Number 13, verse 13, it says, you call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for so am I. You know, he was the one they were following. And here he does this act of humility and service. In their minds, this was probably not the proper thing that should be done. In another vein on this, does it matter the position that we have in this world that should take away us being humble and a servant to others? I don't think so. I don't, you know, what if somebody of great fame and stature and elevation in society, if they come along and they wanted to do something for me, should I allow them to do that? Sure, absolutely. You know, if I don't know, I really don't know a good example in our world today. But if somebody that we knew that was, say, in the government, come along and they said, you know, I see that you have a need, and I want to serve you, which they should be anyway. But I want to serve you, and they come along and say, oh yeah, let me wash your feet. That's that's the kind of person they should be. I want to wash your feet. I want to do for you. And again, even though he was the teacher and Lord, it wasn't a problem to show his servitude, humility. In number 6, it says, if as their Lord and teacher, Jesus could wash their feet, what should they be able to do? Verse 14. If I then, the Lord and the teacher, wash your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. You know, follow the example. And there's things that we can do in service to others. And that's what we need to do. And sometimes our service to others, whatever it may be, is not done for recognition. You know, if we're going to, say, take a sack of groceries to somebody in need, just take them up there and drop them off on the porch. You don't need recognition. You know, if you go and mow somebody's lawn that needs mowed, you don't need recognition. Just mow it and go on and let them be thankful. And the list literally goes on and on of what we do for others. Just do it and don't expect anything back. we live in a time, I guess I've always kind of had this in my mind. If you do something for me, then I owe you. Y'all understand that? Yeah, if you do something for me, then I owe you, and I don't want you doing anything for me. That was kind of the idea of my generation. Uh, but not really. If I do something for somebody, I don't expect anything. I know one time a fellow was very ill, and I'm not bragging on me at all. And I don't brag on me, guys. You guys know that. But his backyard was just awful with a hen bit. It was in the spring. Y'all know what hen bit, when it gets up about like this? You cannot get a mower through it, a lawnmower. And I would go by there and I looked at that and I looked at that and I said, something's got to be done because he is not physically able to do this, and his wife was not either. So I went down and I got my tractor and I took my little tractor down there and I got rid of the hen bit. And he come out there and he says, here, I want to pay you for this. And I told him, I said, don't worry about me. I said, he was very adamant, I got to pay you to do this. I said, if you want to do some good, either pass that on to somebody else, do something good for somebody else, or you can mail that up to the church building as a donation. But don't worry about me. Now, I think that's the attitude that we need to have, is do something for somebody and hope they pass it on. I like the idea that if somebody does something to me, that I pass that blessing on to somebody else. And when we think about Jesus, he passed it on to the world, to all humanity. In number 7, it says, what did Jesus give them and what did Jesus expect? And that kind of goes along with what we're talking about. For I gave you an example so that you should do as I did to you. And that goes like passing it on. Be that great example. In number 8, it says, what 2 illustrations did Jesus use to stress the importance of their learning humble service from him and his action? Verse 16 says, truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who sent greater than the one who sent him. We're just people. We're just people. And we need to be serving others, serving one another, taking care of those needs as we have ability and as we are able. In number 9, it says, when or how would they receive the blessing from their knowledge? And that's dropping us down to verse 17. It says, if we know these things, you are blessed if you do them. I struggled a long time with people helping us in the Lord's work. I really did, especially whenever we went to school, because there were congregations and different groups that would send stuff for the girls. We had a congregation that they'd call in on the phone and say, what are the girl sizes right now? And Linda would tell them, and her and I both kind of struggled with this. And just a little, a month or so come along here, and the girls got these more beautiful dresses and clothes and stuff, and that was hard for us in the beginning. But here's the thing. It's like one of my teachers finally told me, let people do for you, because if you don't, you steal their blessings, and do for others so that you might be blessed.
There's more people needier than myself. So
that's true.
That's the way I am.
I know.
Go do it to someone that needs it more than me.
But And I had that same thing. I mean, I had it bad. But here's the thing: if somebody does something good to you, what do you need to do with that? Pass it on. And see, so this person's being blessed to bless you, so that you can bless this person down the road. And if you see somebody, and I'm the same way. I understand, man. We were raised that way. But pass it on to somebody else. And think of what Jesus did. Jesus gave it all for us. And he was the most blessed individual because he was the Son of God. He had what he needed. As we note here in our outline, number 10, it says, please note that Jesus intentionally stressed the fact that he was their example. And that makes us an example too. That makes us an example of helping others. And then those people can help others. It says here, for the 12 was allowing Jesus to be their example, optional or essential. Well, it was essential because he was the Lord and teacher, the master, the one sent. In B, under number 10, it says, for us is allowing Jesus to be our example, optional or intentional. Well, again, it's essential that we do that. It notes here that washing feet was a demeaning responsibility. We noted a little bit about that. Commonly, this was the task given to a slave who had no rank, no standing, no significance before the master. In other words, the lowly of lowlies. A Jewish master did not require this deed of Jewish slaves that were indentured. And whenever we note that, that's bond slaves, those who chose to be indentured to that master. When Jesus took his outer clothes off, tied a towel around his waist, prepared a basin of water, and stooped before each of them, he looked like their slaves, not their master. This enormous respect for Jesus would have been genuine, and his respect for those others. And I'm kind of like I was talking a while ago, ingrained in me is, I don't want people doing for me, because I agree with Butch 100%. Somebody else needs it worse than me. But then again, I did learn a long time ago that if somebody helps me, that I help somebody else along the road. And that helps me be an example and help others. Some thoughts down here in Mark chapter 10 on our outline. If you want to turn there to Mark chapter 10, verse 35. It says, James and John, the two sons of Zebedee, came up to Jesus saying, Teacher, what we want you to do for us, whatever we ask of you. And he said to them, what do you want me to do for you? They said to him, grant that we may sit, one at your right and one on your left, in your glory. But Jesus said to them, you do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am about to be baptized? They said to him, we are able. And Jesus said to them, the cup that I drink, you shall drink, and you shall be baptized with the baptism with which I was baptized. But to sit on my right or on my left, that is not mine to give, for it is for those for whom it was prepared. Hearing this, the 10 began to feel indignant with James and John. Calling them to himself, Jesus said to them, you know that those who are recognized as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. But it is not this way among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. And I think back here in John 13, that's exactly what Jesus is telling them. I am your servant. Look at my example and serve others. And the greatest thing that we can give others in the world around us today is that precious message of the gospel. So pass on what you've been blessed with. Give it to others. Look at Jesus and his example. We'll look at another lesson, Lord willing, next Lord's Day morning.